Hey there, it's Leo from Firecrawl, and in this video, we'll take a look at the CLI usage from Firecrawl specifically, but to be honest, you should be using this in any tool as it empowers your agent to have access to a much better and native way to run code, look at file system, and much more as you'll see along the video. But just to make sure I don't get ahead of myself, let's dive into the command. So this will be in the description of the video. It's a simple command that installs the skill inside of your agent. And this works not only for Claude Code, but for most of the main agents out there. The first thing you'll want to answer is if you want to install the Firecrawl CLI globally. So I've hit yes, and then if you want to set up different integrations. Before that, if you've never installed it, you'll be guided through the CLI installation as well as the authentication. If you don't, you can just open up your terminal, type in Firecrawl login. It won't work for me since I'm already logged in, but let me log out and log in just to show you how easy it is. As soon as you hit login, it should open up your browser. You just need to click on Authorize CLI. As soon as you're back to your terminal, it should be done. So continuing this skill installation, let me type in yes, and yes, I want to install skills. Now you should be prompted to add which is the agent you want to work with. Just hit the spacebar. You can select more than one. And after you've selected your agent, just hit enter and now select if you want this installed specifically in your project or globally, which will be available to any other project that you open up. For this example, let's install it inside of the project just so there's a better way for you to see the actual structure that is added. It might seem redundant to have two folders that look very alike, but this is a symlink that structures it in the way that Claude expect it to be. So don't be bothered by that. Just leave that as is. And you can select if you want to start from a template. We won't select that for now as we want a fresh start. Now, as soon as you start up a session in your agent, it should recognize Firecrawl whenever it needs to scrape, search, or perform specific dynamical interactions to a website. Before having Claude execute anything, let me show you inside of the terminal how Claude will kind of execute these commands. So if I wanted to Firecrawl scrape firecrawl.dev, this is basically telling it that I want to use Firecrawl to scrape inside of this website. And I can add specific flags. So for example, summary, this flag will use the specific parameter from the summary format in Firecrawl and eventually retrieve exactly that right here. But before I actually test scrape, let's test search. I can type in something like fetch the top AI news for me. All right, it understood that it should use Firecrawl, loaded the skill, and now it's using the search feature to look up top AI news from March 2026. And this is the exact point why using the CLI is so important. This empowers the agent to dynamically assign specifically what is needed for that search. It understood that it could assign the news source as well as it limited the search query by a day and limited the amount of search retrieved by 10. This is specific to what I'm doing. Even if my prompt is not that specific, I mentioned fetch the top AI news. I didn't just say fetch any AI news. And from that, it reasoned on that information to use exactly what was needed to fetch my query. And there it is. Now let's have it use the scrape feature. So scrape the first news for me. It understood it should use Firecrawl scrape, assigned that specific URL. It's flagging to get only the main content. And by the way, this will all be saved in this markdown file. So now after a while, it comes back with the result that I expected. And now comes a really important part that I want to pause and explain through it carefully so that you understand the power of just using the CLI. As you can see here, after we did the search, this is what was saved. So we keep everything that was searched from Firecrawl. If I ever ask for AI news again, it should understand that this is already added as a file and should read through this. And when I scrape the content, it was saved as a markdown file. This markdown file is the entire website. Now imagine everything we're seeing here, all of these lines inside of your context window. Well, that's one thing that could happen when you don't work with a file system like this. Let me explain this inside of XCollyDraw just to make sure that you understand. So let's suppose that this is our context window. This is the web page we're scraping. Now, by the way, this can be absolutely enormous, and you might have a lot of different lines here that if you try to scrape everything just by going for a simpler scraper, what happens is that you're tokenizing everything. This will take a longer time to be processed. This will waste you more money because of this tokenization. Your model can hallucinate because of this, and you can eventually reach the context window much faster and have to wait for that context window to be compressed just to only continue. And while that's being compressed, you're wasting more money, more time, and the ongoing infinite context window loop. Now, what happens when you're using the Firecrawl CLI is the following. Whenever the agent needs to scrape, it goes over to that website, grabs everything, and instead of adding it to the context window, it actually saves that in the file system, which is this exact huge markdown right here. And then whenever it needs to read this file, it has a lot of different tools to do that. That is in fact exactly what Claude Code is specialized in doing, because it is designed to deal with huge code bases. So for example, it has the access to tools like a finder, where it could add a specific string and only get the line from which that string was found. Not only that, but it should chunk and get from that line above or from that line previous. Or it could chunk to get the last 200 characters, the next 200. What I'm trying to say is that it has a bunch of different ways to fetch for only the context that it needs and not just do a Control A, grab everything from the file and just add it to the context window. So now everything is here in a clean markdown fetched from Firecrawl, but Claude can precisely fetch for whatever it needs. And these are just some of the benefits for that. So output control, composability with shell tools, which is exactly what I mentioned, as well as you have an error recovery system, a way to cache everything that you fetched. And that way Claude should be smart enough to not scrape for something that was scraped previously. Another benefit of using the CLI is parallelization. You've probably seen sub agents from Claude, which basically triggers other instances of Claude Code to run. And that is something that is possible with the CLI. Now let's move on to the browser automation. This is where I get very excited, just because if you're empowering an agent with dynamic capabilities of browsing something, what if you add a layer of having it interact with a web page? And with that, just allow it to apply code inside of that web interface. What I mean is exactly this. If it already knows with search exactly what I need and applies that to the website, so then it should also be smart enough to navigate through a website, know what it's seeing, and know dynamically what to do to handle any situation. This is an example that I really like to use because this website has a table that we can only see more LLMs if we click the See More button. If we were to just scrape this, it would retrieve only the first 4 LLMs because that's the only thing rendered here. But after I click on See More, then we can see all the 10 LLMs from the first page of the table. So also, if I were to ask for the 21st, it would have to be smart enough to click on the pagination, go to the next page, and get everything from within here. And that is exactly what the browser should be able to do. So let me just type in something like go to airank.dev, get the top 21st LMs from the main table in the home page. I'm not being specific on how it needs to handle this. So it should be smart enough to try to scrape for the first time. And after it's scraped, recognize it needs dynamic capabilities and then use the browser. Since we want to speed things up, I'll just say use the Firecrawl browser feature. All right, it understood it needed to create a browser session, and we can actually track that browser session right here in the playground from Firecrawl. Just click here on interact with the web, and soon enough, we should be able to see the session running. All right, it understood that it needed to start a browser session. If you go back to our playground, you can actually see the browser working. It's already on the second page. It was actually so fast that we lost that. But just go over to the interact with the web page and you should see the session in there. So as you can see, the top 20 LMs was searched. Let me have it search the top 30. And now just head immediately back to the dashboard to see the session working. So as you can see, it's giving an actual browser over to Claude Code so that it scrapes everything. Since it already has the context from page 1 and 2, it went directly to page 3 to grab all those LLMs. And now after it has everything, it should answer back with the top 30 results. And there it is. Another cool thing about the browser is persistent sessions. So if you know you're always going to get data from a specific website, if you want to authenticate yourself inside of a specific website, you can just start up a new browser, which will open up something like this that is completely interactive. So if you type in something here like AI news, it is actually doing the Google search. You can go inside of websites, again, authenticate yourself inside of that website, just in case you want to fetch for specific data that you would have access to anyway. And since I just started a persistent session inside of my profile 3, let me specify this over to Claude Code and say, check Firecrawl's browser sessions to see which one is active. It's really a simple command, Firecrawl browser list. This retrieves that this specific session is working. And by the way, you can have parallel sessions. So a bunch of different sessions just working at the same time. I can have it get me exactly what is showing up in that session. Print screen and place it in the root of my project. All right, sometimes it might make some mistakes, but eventually it got me the screenshot of exactly the browser session that we are running. All right, I hope this video helped you understand why using CLI is an absolute game changer, and hopefully it got you excited to use our browser feature. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Till then.